Welcome to Therapy Sessions, Cutting Toxic Family Ties. My name is Dr. Sherry Campbell, and I'm your host. I am a leading expert in the niche of toxic family abuse, and although my show cannot substitute for therapy, it is a survivor-based show. In me, you're not only going to get an expert, but you're also going to get a survivor, as I have also survived toxic family abuse. I know how hard it is. The goal I have is to give voice to the voiceless, to provide skills to help you to protect your peace, to stand your solid ground, and to navigate and heal the heartbreaks caused by toxic family. Please have a pen and paper available to give voice to your thoughts as you listen to each show. Thank you for joining me. Thank you for your bravery. So let the healing begin. Welcome in, everyone. It's Dr. Sherry. I am here with the most amazing woman, Vanessa Reiser. Her story is incredible. As you know, we are on Therapy Sessions, Cutting Toxic Family Ties. And Vanessa is good friends with Dave, whom is a fan favorite on my podcast. That episode did very well. Always nice to hear a male's voice here in the toxic family system realm. Loving that our men are speaking up more. I feel like we're so lucky to have their viewpoints, and they will help other men and women even to understand their own situations more. So Vanessa and Dave are very close friends, and this is kind of how we've all been connected. So I'm going to just let Vanessa tell you about herself. She has an incredible story. What she's well known for is just amazing, and she's got a new book out. So all of that will be in the show notes. But Vanessa, welcome to Therapy Sessions.
Thank you so much for having me.
You bet.
So my name is Vanessa Reiser. I am a licensed clinical social worker practicing in the states of New York, New Jersey, Massachusetts, and Florida. I'm best known for running across the state of New York in a wedding dress to raise awareness for narcissistic abuse in 2021. It was 285 miles. I did it in 11 days from Oswego to Manhattan. And then we subsequently ran across New Jersey, Connecticut, and then Massachusetts this year. And I just got a book deal picked up by Hachette. So I wrote a book called Narcissistic Abuse, A Therapist's Guide to Identifying, Escaping, and Healing from Toxic and Manipulative People. Comes out October 29th. And in this book, it aims to fuse the concepts of narcissistic abuse and cult abuse.
Well, that's a great fit for this show. You know, and I also love that it's a therapist guide. I wrote a clinician's manual, but only for my publisher. So my publisher has like a clinician's corner because it's almost all clinicians that write for New Harbinger. So what I hear all the time in here is that therapists don't know what to do with the toxic family dynamic. And in my book, Adult Survivors of Emotionally Abusive Parents, I kind of parallel that it's no different to leave a toxic family than it is to leave a cult. How would you add to that information for the readers? Can you see the parallels between toxic family and cult?
Yeah, so that's exactly what my mission was. When I started working with Mark Vicente from the Nexium cult, it clicked. Like literally, I know it sounds really cliche, but I was like, so I was in a cult of one because the same tactics were used for mind control. So it was, the narcissist, the sociopath, or the psychopath runs these groups. So you can be in a cult of one, a cult of two, a cult of five, as we saw with the stolen youth cult in New York, or you can be in a cult of millions and millions in some of these political scenarios. But certainly a family system can function exactly as a cult. And I would posit that there are more cults in those environments in terms of your neighbors and their family systems than any other cult. It's just, we don't think of the word cult as being something that we would ever, let's say, fall into. I could never be victimized by a cult leader. I think the word has with it a connotation that we don't really attach to. It feels weird to us to say it that way. But that's exactly what a toxic family is. It's basically a cult.
Yeah, really, any group of people can be a cult. If we look at the little girl, Aubrey Wyatt, who was She just committed suicide, and she was abused by 4 girls for many years, and she finally couldn't take it anymore. And there's been all these lawsuits around that thing. But when you really read her story and you travel up, you recognize that it's still starting at the parents. And they shut the mother's social media down for talking about their daughter being the main bully. Okay. So that really, too, just these scenarios, any group of people can be a cult. It could be an MLM, it could be anything. And I really woke up to that just by accident. I love documentaries and docuseries, and I started watching Scientology and the Aftermath by Leah Remini. And I found myself crying quite often. And I found myself feeling wounded and hurt. And it was so familiar to me. And I was really struggling to figure out why, because I never thought about the idea of any group of people can be a cult. But so much of the smear campaign that Leah went through, and I think her partner's name is Mike, what he went through, is so very similar in the behavioral pattern. Now, they weren't going through my mail and living next door to me and, stuff like that. There wasn't quite the money and the power, but financial abuse was certainly and continues to certainly be a part of my abuse even 8 years later. And being ganged up on and ostracized and scapegoated is cultish behavior. And there was a woman at my TEDx event where I spoke. She also spoke, and she talked about being in a cult and that you can be in one and not know. And I love and appreciate what you said about the narcissist, the sociopath, the psychopath, or even any borderline could be a masterful leader, right? It's the need for power over all else and the conquer and divide so that no one can have an alliance. So siblings are pulled apart. The passive parent is pulled apart from the siblings. The most toxic person is the least confronted. They have that need for power. I also believe that they have obviously no empathy, right? There's no empathy, but they want all empathy going to them. And they're so confusing that it's hard to get away. Tell us about some confusion, because I think it's a tactic in a cult, and the person that you reference and that the cult of one that you were in, I think that's such a phenomenal phrase, because many of us marry these people.
Yeah.
For decades.
Everything for them is about supply and attention. So they're addicted to the dopamine they get from that attention because they seek that validation because they're pretty insecure and void. So whatever they have to do to get that attention, they will do. And the only way for them to get that is to confuse and control. And the only way to confuse and control is to become master manipulators. So they've been honing these skills from very early on. I think this starts before teen years. I don't subscribe to this sort of just randomly shows up in a teen year. We see this in the clinical world showing up as oppositional defiant disorder. We assess for that in youth through harming animals, setting fires. So we see these things early on. And then they develop these manipulative tactics and it works. I mean, they end up in C-suites. 1 out of 4 CEOs is a psychopath directly because they don't have empathy. So they climb the corporate ladder. So it absolutely works. And I think the hardest part is when you are dealing with a cult of many, it is particularly difficult to extricate yourself from some of those family systems as the black sheep because you're outnumbered. So your data brain is going to say to yourself, like, it must be me. Everyone else is okay with this, right? And how do you come to terms with that? How do you process something like that? So in the cult of one, even though it is so difficult to get out because the post-separation abuse is so severe and they will exploit your children and torture you through the judicial system, which is totally corrupt.
Totally corrupt.
It is also this madness around managing being like the black sheep in those really larger experiences. And that's why we see people not leaving like Leah Remini and being really, really up against the powers as they try to destroy your life. It's extremely difficult. And that's why it takes women 7 times to leave abusive relationships, because it's very hard. People say like, why didn't you leave? And it's funny because I have this opposite approach. When my clients come to me, I'm like, I don't know how you're going to get out of there. I mean, it's no joke. So this idea, why don't you leave? It's like, why don't you stay? In some cases, it feels easier to stay. Once you pull up that Band-Aid and you reveal who they are and they know you know who they are, and that narcissistic injury is coming, it is a death wish. They can try to destroy your life. And sometimes they're very successful through their charm and sort of Jekyll and Hyde persona. And it's extremely challenging. So, and a lot of therapists don't get it.
No, they don't get it. And I so appreciate that, because a lot of therapists now are rallying against therapists like me who support cutting off. Okay. What's hard about the family system is I didn't choose to be a part of that cult. I was born into that. And I'm leaving my mother. I'm leaving my father. I'm leaving necessary limbs, not a group I found later, right? And my whole identity was developed and created by these people. So I faced what I call in my new book just defamiliarization. I went through this phase of like, I have to go, but I have no idea if what I'm going to is going to be okay. And if I go, I can't ever go back there. And if they ever did accept me back, I would be abused even worse for the rest of my life because I exposed them. So I'm enemy number one, right? So I talk about a space that at some point I was just done. I was done. I was now being abused over meaningless things and horrifically abused and humiliated in front of my daughter. I had to stop. So I spent about 3 to 5 years in what I called no man's land. So I got out, but the smear campaign started. So when I was in, I felt like I could at least have some, and this was not true, but I felt like I could have some predictability of maybe what was going to happen. So to have no idea felt different, although I never had any idea when I was in. But I sat frozen with my eye on that world to try and keep this new space safe. But I could not even fathom going to this world. It took me 45 years to get out of my family. I describe it like almost being paralyzed, where the brain does not know those legs are not working, for example. So it's going to send signals down to those legs as if they're going to work. And then it gets trapped, right, in the spinal cord prior to the injury. There isn't a person who's been injured like that doesn't want to walk. But they have like these phantom limbs, right? That is what it's like for adult children. Cutting off from a cult-like family but they're out walking around and living and they'd rather die and go to their grave than take any kind of accountability or ownership. So there's this level of pain that hurts the child self so deeply that it makes you question everything. And I so appreciate that you brought that up, because the confusion eroded my resiliency to knowing my truth. And a lifeline for me was writing. I would have to write myself back into existence to get the right perception of me, of right and wrong, because morals get very confusing. And I want to try something on with you, because I've been thinking about this a lot when I deal with women that are in very toxic relationships with men, or vice versa, right? The idealized, devalue, discard, and hoover, right? Their favorite parts, in my opinion, of that process is the idealizing and the discarding. because hoovering is a part of the idealizing. Can I get them back? They devalue and discard because they don't, that would be where the work of the relationship would be. It'd be very low dopamine. There wouldn't be anything going on there that would give them that high. But after you've been idealized, after being discarded, the idealizing feels so good. And this even happened with my parents. All of a sudden, I'd be elevated and I wouldn't know why. But I'd be like, oh my God, please, please, I hope it lasts. Like maybe now it's changed. Maybe now I'm good. Maybe now they're going to love me. But they only elevated me to get the golden child sibling back into giving them the attention they wanted. So I was constantly falling. Or they loved the idea of, we don't want her to know the truth. We can't let her fall too far. So now we got to hoover her a little bit, right? It's like this cat and mouse game. And I get questioned a lot about this one. Do they know what they're doing? Hands down, yes, they know what they're doing, right? How would you speak to that? Do they know what they're doing?
Well, by and large, they do. If you're dealing with somebody who has a pathological personality disorder, which it sounds like you were, then they do. There are people who are narcissistic, who could just maybe, be doing things that are habitual, that seem to work for them. But sort of the high level disordered pathological personalities definitely know what they're doing. And you say something that I think is so important to identify in terms of the difference between being the child of a narcissist and being in an intimate relationship or in a cult as someone in a fellowship is really, really pronounced. And here's how I see it, because a lot of my clients come to me with narcissistic mothers. And what happens, like when I left my abusive relationship, I just went back to the bitch I was before. I just went and found her again. Now, she was hard to find.
Yeah.
She was there, but I was like, oh yeah, that's her. I recognize this girl. When you have a narcissistic parent, and this is why my beautiful friend, Sherry, this is why I feel your kind of pain here, is that because this starts so early on, you don't get to develop a sense of self. For you to go find that bitch, it's like, who even is this bitch? Like, we have to figure out. So to me, and I get the chills just saying it, is that it's a mountain to climb. Who am I? What inspires me? Because what happens when you have thoughts is you're going to run it through the lens of what would the toxic parent want me to do? Or even just as controlling, what would they not want me to do? So you do this thing where you're like, I'm going to do this because mother would have definitely wanted me to do the opposite. You're still giving them the power, right? So like,
oh yeah,
both lenses are corrupt. And so you have to kind of like take the time and like step into like healthy cognition and like blow out all the garbage in your brain and really develop who you are. Now, it sounds like it's this sort of fatalistic, horrifying thing, but listen, women do this anyway in a lot of ways in their lives a bunch of different times. You have children, then you have a rebirth. You sort of recreate and reinvent yourself a million times over. So I see it as an opportunity, but I think the children of narcissists have it far worse in that they have been groomed. They are an extension of their parent, and they really have to almost like cut their arm off to get away, to sort of develop their own sense of self.
I so appreciate that. And thank you for the acknowledgement, because I didn't have a bitch before. I wasn't born yet, and when I think of bitch, I think of the acronym babe in total control of herself. Okay. Right. That's so correct. And I'm so glad that you put it in that framework, because there wasn't a me before being born that I can call on and go back to. But I will say that in the latest book, I talk about this 3 aspects of self paradigm that I came up with. I had learned to hate little Sherry. I saw her as the fuck up she was, the reason that I was the lemon of the family, because the family would have been great, Vanessa, had I not been a part of it. There's just, I don't know, she came out bad, But what I did come out with was truth and an inability to adhere to anything differently. And that caused me much heartache. I kept trying to change me to be like them so that they would love me. And I became a shape changer, a people pleaser. I had an eating disorder. But, at some point with the eating disorder, because I'm very afraid to vomit, thank God. So I just starved myself from 16 to 18, but I turned to vapor. And in so many ways, that transition saved my life. It gave me a break. All I cared about was how many fat grams I had. And all I cared about is that I was eating less than other people because in some twisted state of mind, I was stronger than they were. I could do something they couldn't do. See, I could starve myself. So I look at it metaphorically. Well, of course I starved myself. I had been starved my entire life. That was just one way to go along with the program, but it robbed my mother of her power to make me good or bad. Now food did it, and I had control over that. And then I would self-punish if I didn't have control, and I'd eat a rice cake and go run 3 miles to work it off because I wasn't supposed to have that rice cake. I did all this math in my mind. But in some way I look back on it and I'm like, but it gave me a break from that. As I traveled on through my life and having a daughter and knowing that, then that made things clear on a whole other level. I'm in the middle of a PhD program and I'm recognizing like, wow, I don't want them around my kid. My daughter, like, it was like I felt they were making her dirty. And I was like, what is wrong with me? I'm such a mean child. I'm such a mean daughter because I was still dealing with that. And then a lot of people, but she's your mom, like, so there's this support for the cognitive dissonance around family that everyone else that's not family gets away with. Because surely parents cannot be abusive. They love their children. Says who? Says who? Because that's not true. They were abusers prior to me. They remained abusive throughout the raising of me, and they're wicked abusers today. They never changed. What I made some mistakes in was trying to understand them, thinking this was going to bring me healing, and then trying to help them understand what I understood so we could all be friends, right? I don't hang my hat on understanding anymore. I hang it on truth. Understanding them didn't change them. The labels don't change them. All it does is it lets me know what kind of cancer I've got. And that's helpful. But I'm 53. So when I was going through therapy, because I got caught having the eating disorder, there wasn't that labeling. None of this was here. I mean, it was in the books, but it's not how we talked to our clients at all. Right? So I feel like what happened was the part of me that was the truth. I learned through time that it was always little Sherry. She was the only part of me that never lied. She always told me the truth. And she got me in trouble, so I didn't like her. And I had a hard time as the me today liking her for a very long time. Repairing that, there is nothing my family can do now, nothing, that would destroy me. Might destroy me for a minute, but it's not going to destroy me forever because I came together internally. And now I adhere to authenticity. I adhere to truth because I truly believe that if we're not in reality and we're wanting people to be different than they are, we really cannot heal. Right. And
yeah. I think that's amazing. I remember when I left the abusive relationship, I was being so wickedly mirrored by him. He would use like music that I liked as his ringtone, and he would dress, tried to get hobbies like me and interests. It was very, very sort of shapeshifty and chameleon-like, and it was very odd, but I was being so mirrored that I became far more narcissistic. I was kind of like the worst version of myself. I had all kinds of diamonds and weird shit that I would never really, bags and shoes and stuff that I didn't really care about. And I remember just changing. Like I remember feeling dirty about that, but also I did, as many cult leaders do, sort of change and modify the way that, cult followers do. So in that experience, when I did leave, I kept asking myself, am I the narcissist? Am I the problem here? And it was because I remembered that I wasn't a liar that I was able to step into my power. That's when I figured it out, is that I was always truthful, always authentic. I was not a liar. It just was a thing, to the extent where people will tell you, like, I just have kind of I can kind of put my foot in my mouth sometimes, because if it comes into my brain, it kind of comes out of my face and I don't really realize, but
Oh, I'm sorry about my face.
yeah. Yeah. And so people would probably be able to say a lot of things about me, but they would never be able to call me a liar. And that was like how I was able to hang, as you mentioned, that's how I was able to hang my hat on, who I was, because I became so destabilized. I was very confused. My whole being had sort of been sucked out. And the truth is really what saved me.
Yeah. And I think it's emotional cannibalism.
It is.
When I studied the psychoviolence, we learned a lot about cannibals, and they eat people to be close to them. Their idea is that if I eat you, then I'm going to be close to you. Then there's no relationship work. So it doesn't work out that way. You've ingested them, but they're not going to live through you, And I feel like that's what narcissistic parents, partners, CEOs, they all want. It's just emotional cannibalism. I always say that they know what they're doing because they know they're smart. They're smart enough to know that what they're doing is hurting their victim. Whether they want to change that or not is up to them, but they know, even if it's habituated, they still get a result, and they still get the result that they've hurt somebody, and they don't give a fuck, and that, I think, is what is so bizarre. I used to self-punish that I couldn't lie. Like, why do I have to say what I feel? Why can't I just take it? Why do I always have to say something about it? Because it was wrong. What was happening to me was so amoral and so wrong, right? And it's behind closed doors in families so often, and also in any relationship. I had a woman sent to my page by my mother who said no one witnessed my abuse. So I'm sorry. You think she's going to do it out loud and in public?
Right.
You're really that naive. Of course you didn't see it by design.
Right.
Like, it's amazing what people will believe, because it's so painful to think that abuse is happening in our closest quarters and to the most innocent members of our human family. Right? I was on another show and I really love this guy. He runs an Instagram called the Academy of Self-Help, and I just love him. And he interviewed me recently, and he said, "You said the word sadistic on Kristen Cavallari's podcast." And mostly he has talked a lot about the immature parent. Okay, so there are lots of immature parents who are just not high on the EQ, and it's not calculated, right? They just say dumb shit. Is it frustrating? Yes. They're self-centered, kind of self-referential. If you say, how are you? They're like, it's a lecture, right? And it kind of doesn't stop. And they kind of say things that are inappropriate, but they're loving. They kiss you, they hug you, they care a little bit about you, but it's kind of more about them, but they're not seeking to harm. Sadistic parents want, crave, and need to see how much power they can have over a child. They love the fear, and they love the groveling, and they love the punishment, and then they love messing with your hope so that you hate them, and then you hate them and they're satisfied, and then they go love bomb you. And it was so confusing that I did stop talking. I didn't stop feeling my truth, but I learned to stop talking it because it was getting me abused. So when you stop talking, it's over. The relationship is over if you have to stop talking, because poking the bear is so not worth the cost, right? Did you find in your toxic relationship that it was so circular and so maddening that you were like, there's no point? It's like, think what you want.
I finally did at the end. He would involve me in these circular conversations for like 5 hours a day ad nauseum. And I was kind of misfiring because I'm very sort of logical brained and I'm a very good student. So if you tell me something, I imagine it's going to be true. And so when there were all of these untruths being, slung about, I just started to misfire, like almost like stutter. And then when he would come around, I would get very anxious because I think it's a brain injury. I think lying actually creates a brain injury. I think that kind of destabilization to what you imagine to be true can put you into a fight or flight scenario because you're kind of like, this isn't safe. This doesn't feel safe. This is a problem. I thought this is true. Now you're telling me this is true. And so I would have to do that for hours and hours and hours, just listen to garbage. And it was literally word salad. None of it made any sense.
Absolutely.
And then I, at the very end, started to realize that this was a waste of my time. There was no counseling this person. And then I started to just kind of move away from the engagements. But then that was where the punishments would really begin because I guess this sort of me slipping out of his grasp is going to be a problem.
I get this, you're just not going to talk. You're not talking now.
Yeah.
Like to bait me. And that's why I say when you stop talking, the relationship's over. Because that's at the end when you're like, there's no point. It's a waste of words. What you said about the brain injury, I so appreciate that you said that. It's so powerful and it's so true. The brain processes heartbreak as shock, true shock. And the brain also believes that the heart organ is damaged, the organ itself. So there's more neurochemistry in our heart than our brain. It's like if you want something, if you're into manifesting, you can't just think it. You've got to really want it with all your heart, right? And it is brain damage. And it has been proven that Shawshank Redemption type of covert abuse that is not physical, not seen, no bruise over the course of your life is far more traumatic on the brain than one massive traumatic event.
Yep.
So thank you so much for bringing that point up because I don't think that people recognize what it's actually doing. Making this up doesn't serve any survivor. It's like it might serve a narcissist to have some dramatic story or whatever, but nothing about living this life has served me. It hasn't made my life better. I'm very proud of where I'm at, and what I've chosen to do is to turn my predators into a purpose, right? But that was a conscious choice. And I would say that it's given me one hell of an EQ. But the pain, people just do not seem to get it because they don't want to believe that a parent, especially a mother, would do this to their own offspring. And there's no more vicious a human being behind a keyboard in social media than a toxic mother. I'm not giving dads a free pass. I had a very toxic, physically abusive, narcissistic, sociopathic father. He doesn't get a free pass. But he could cut me off like I didn't exist, and mothers won't shut up.
One of the things that I notice about the narcissistic mother is that they are adept at perpetuating a narrative or optics that are particularly confusing.
That they are the victim.
Yeah, and that some of them can be even highly credentialed and gracious and, kind of...
My mom runs charities for cancer kids.
Right. So they have an ability to wrap it in a shiny little bow that maybe, the more overt version of this does not.
Yeah, and they couch their cruelty as parenting. I just want what's in your best interest. Okay, but you just called me fat. Doesn't make sense really, right? I know, but you're so sensitive. So They have such a powerful way of projecting and deflecting, and they're so masterful. And that is why I just can't get in alignment with, if they're emotionally immature, truly maybe they don't know what they're doing, right? But when you get to the high level character disordered person, they know exactly what they're doing, and it is a game, and they will win. And that's another truth that I had to put some humility to. I stopped trying to win. My truth didn't matter. I was also told I was narcissistic by my mom. And I was like, God, am I? Am I? Because I do react and I do get upset. And I feel like I get more upset than she gets upset. So maybe I'm just fundamentally flawed. And my first therapist said, if you even ask that question, you can't be.
Right. They have no insight.
No, they have no insight. Do you have kids, Vanessa?
I do. I have a 25-year-old son.
Nice. I have a 20-year-old daughter, almost 20. How is he, or was he at all impacted by seeing a change in you? And how did you handle that as a mom?
It was interesting because my ex left me in Cape Cod on holiday once, and I had no credit cards. No, he turned off the credit cards, and he was gaslighting my son. And he was trying to tell my son that I was, that he was right around the corner. Where's your mom? I'm going to go pick her up. But I could see him on the app that I had on the phone that he was 2.5 hours away. And for just a split second, I could see him confuse my son. And that's where I completely lost it. It was like a fraction of a second. I thought I was going to lose Anthony. I was like, uh-oh, and then I remember telling my son on the phone, go to your father, just find your father, because I didn't even trust myself at that point. I was confused myself. So I said, just jump ship, go find daddy and just talk to him about what's going on and just stay away from both of us right now, because until I can figure this out, I did not want him to be vulnerable to, manipulation. And then ultimately, when I did finally leave, I was homeless for a few months, staying at my mother's house. I had a tenant and the tenant wouldn't leave. And so that was a little bit messy. But I remember him being somewhat impacted as I was. And I remember trying to inspire him to remember who he was before the relationship as well. So I was counseling him on, okay, Anthony, you're the lifeguard. You're this kid. I was trying to help him to sort of get his legs back and understand, because we all sort of moved in with the abuser and we were kind of all swept away. My son definitely got love bombed, big time. So
God, that's so hard.
Yeah. So it was just kind of, I wanted him to get, the same things that experience the same things I was experiencing, in that let's go find who Anthony was again. I'm going to find Vanessa again, and we're going to figure it out. So I was just trying to remind him of who he was.
Yeah. Yeah. Write him back into existence.
And I remember him saying to me, but Mom, he loves you. And I said, Anthony, there's good news and there's bad news. The good news is you don't get it, because that means you have a normal brain and you can't see that there are toxic people out there. I said, the bad news is you don't get it, which means there's going to be somebody that might try to manipulate you in your life. So we learned together. And as I began to build out my practice and study all the things and become an expert in this field, I think so too has Anthony. I think he would tell you at this point, when he hears me in session or he hears me writing a book and telling him all the things, I think he pretty much has his PhD now.
Have you ever seen that meme that says something like, I dated a narcissist and now have a PhD in psychology, right? Yeah, because I do think information is power, Was there anything about you or your childhood that you think maybe drew you into this relationship? Anything about it that was familiar? Because it doesn't have to be there. Because if you have a good heart, you're susceptible to these people. But for many of us, me especially included, is I definitely married my mom and then had a short-lived marriage after that to someone who was very similar to my father. And then they say you marry your worst parent. Well, I had two. So I had two marriages. Now I haven't been married since 38. because there's 9 marriages between my parents. And I've been with someone for 8 years that I love very much. And future forward, we will get married or be engaged forever, depending on me. But I do feel like so much of my being drawn, and I had toxic friends. I mean, I was really susceptible to the gamut of all those people because I was so unidentified and afraid. I was afraid of people, and I just wanted to please everybody. And that really got me in trouble. What parts of your personality do you think, or your life or childhood, kind of led you in here?
Well, mother was very manic. My mother is not a narcissist. She does have empathy, but in her ups and downs, I think that cycle felt familiar. And I think that was something that I thought, like, by golly, I can just help him, kind of fix this sort of
Unpack
bipolar.
manic for me, just in case the listeners don't know how to frame that.
So he would sort of buzz around like neon. He was kind of grandiose and just high energy, go, go, go. And, it was a lot. And then there was this, again, sort of this devaluing. So the ups and downs in the cycle, I thought were normal. They seemed very familiar to my childhood because that was something that I did witness. So I think that part of it, I thought he was kind of eccentric as my mother. My mother's an artist. We are in a good space now, but we had an adversarial relationship from my childhood because I ended up being kind of like the mother to my brothers in a lot of ways. But that sort of grandiose, sort of highly sexualized, I'm hot shit, kind of stuff was something that I was not turned off by because I saw that in my childhood.
Busy. Because I describe my mother as very manic. I mean, like she's reverberating, she's buzzing around everywhere. And I you get around her, like, I was like, oh my gosh, she'd leave. And I'd be like, like just, everything has to be on time. And I've got false hypoglycemia, but I'm convinced I have it. And we have to eat now. We can't eat here. And I'm sick. I'm going to die. I'm just like my whole life was lived in that way. And, and I so can relate to that. And I haven't had any other guest or really anyone else talk about that. And I so appreciate that you brought that up because I don't know why she's that way. She's certainly not bipolar, but I sort of believe that these people internally hate themselves and they kind of know how they are. But if they just stay fucking busy, then maybe you can't catch them. It's like whack-a-mole, it's insane. But I can see how, like, if you're in love and it's more sexual, it's a sexual relationship, how that could be so fun and so exciting. And I dated a few of those and they were fun for a minute, and then they just really weren't fun anymore. And I think I have found myself through every trauma. I've reawakened to a new version of me. And, I kind of want to end the show with healing and that there's so much hope. I am 8 years out of my family. I am genuinely happy. I love the bitch that I am today. I love that she hasn't, my family, my father, my sibling, they haven't, my aunt, they all cut me off. So no one's hardened me. I'm still able to love and be free and be authentic. Now, I would say that I'm suspicious of people. I have a habit of thinking the bottom's going to fall out at any moment. 9 marriages between parents will do that to you. There's so much change, but you can be a good mother coming from a toxic family. You could be the best mother in all the land. I love my daughter to pieces. I think she's fascinating and fun and incredible. And I think that we have to turn our predators to a purpose. I always feel sad that anyone could stay stuck in no man's land and just live in that sad story. You can be there for as long as you need to be, but there is life and we have choice, right? And we're not under their rule anymore. Mommy and daddy can't get mad anymore. And now if they get mad, fuck them. Who cares, right? It's your life. And how would you encourage somebody to embrace this moment? Like, this is your life now when it's so unfamiliar. I did it in baby steps, but what would your advice be?
I would say get yourself surrounded by like-minded folks. Find your tribe.
Great
I don't really
advice.
have a lot of friends now at this point in my life who don't get it. I had lost a lot of friends after the relationship because he was very wealthy. And so they thought, oh, put me in, coach, I'll be next. They were kind of circling the wagons to
I'm in
get,
line.
yeah. And so I watched that happen, and I watched a lot of people look for those resources from him. And it was particularly damaging, that part. So the first fallout of a relationship is like the earthquake. And then you lose these friends. And I refer to it as like these aftershocks, because you're like,
Yes.
oh shit, I can't believe, this one is gone. And there were people I was bracing to lose. Thank God I didn't lose. But, I think surround yourself with people that get it. A lot of us end up with things like CPTSD. So people have to honor your kind of gathering information on how to regulate your emotions, because
I
it's really
call
hard.
those the monsters in my basement.
Yeah.
And I'm writing a book on it right now because my publishers asked me to write a workbook. Um, I love the advice. And I do think I call it shedding. I lost everyone and more. I lost people I didn't think I could lose with the smear campaign. And I'm here and I'm okay.
Mm-hmm.
What I recognized in losing people is that they weren't really abandoning me, but they didn't want to go against my perpetrators. That was far scarier of a sacrifice for them, likely because they probably had to see them. I live in a different state than it was to keep connected to me. I have empathy for that. I lived there. I get it. But anyone, and I want everyone to know this before we close down, is that anyone involved in a smear campaign is a weak person. And the large majority of them don't even think about if they're with you or against you. They're thinking only about their own safety, looking at you and going, I don't want that to happen to me. So that's weakness. Cycle breakers, we have it all. You do have it in you. I think our listeners need to know they can make it through these hard days. You might have hard years. I did years. I had hard years. But if you hang your hat on truth and you stop trying to understand and forgive, okay, and that's a heavily loaded topic that I rarely talk about, because we get people who are lovingly into their religion that have a very strict idea of how forgiveness should be applied. Whereas I believe that we should come up with a new definition for psychological forgiveness. And I have not been creative enough to get that down in a way that it separates itself from a religious forgiveness. But forgiveness for me kept me more abused. Acceptance for me, accepting them as exactly who they are, liberated me. So I choose to accept them for exactly who they are, not needing them to be different, even though on days I might want them to be different, but I don't need them to be different. Right. And I think that there is a way out. And I just, look how, just for my listeners, look at Vanessa, how strong this woman is, how creative that is to run across a state or states in a wedding dress to see other women, have them feel seen and validated by narcissistic abuse. If she and I can do this, we aren't special. We just committed. And I think any healing process takes a certain amount of commitment and discipline. Avoidance will only keep you in avoidance, and it will keep you unhealed and repeating patterns. So we're going to close down. Vanessa, what would you say to kind of curtail on that note that I just had to the listeners who maybe think, I get it. I hear you. I see you, but I don't know if I can do that.
I think if you step into your power and your autonomy and your agency, the narcissist is allergic to that. It's like kryptonite. So it checks every box. So see if you can, manage developing a list of things you love about yourself. Put pictures up, put visuals, put accolades, kind of lean into that, step into your power, get inspired, find passions, And then you will see organically toxic people will slither away because they don't want to be around somebody who is an independent thinker, who's strong, who's outspoken. They will just organically disappear from your life.
Such amazing advice. Thank you so much, Vanessa. Thank you for coming on my show.
Thank you for having me.
I love you to death already. And we just met.
Likewise.
It's always like you meet a sister on a certain day, and this type of stuff can bond you into a whole new group of people that absolutely see you. And yes, step into your power. Think about that today, my little Sherpy tribe, and love you guys. So until next time, be well, take care of you. Well, Bravehearts, that concludes our amazing Sherpy session for the day. Please sign up on my email list at drsherrycampbell.com so that you can be in touch with me and see what's going on in terms of what I'm offering soon, what books are coming out, etc. Talk to you in a couple of weeks.